Once again, the bing bangs, the tip taps around are rain droplets on the roof of the car and whatnot. Yeah, so ignore those. Or if you like it, listen to them. Listen to them more than me. I don't care. Whatever you're in here for, fine, go ahead. Anyway, so I've been thinking about it for a while, drawing similarities of how other people describe cults to the trans community, and I just wanted to finally put something together where it's saying kind of pretty much in plain English, point through point, what makes the trans community a cult. What I used for this one was Steven Hassan made an outline of what's the recipe of a cult, and so he outlined the BITE model, and BITE, that stands for behavioral, information, thought, and emotional control. And I looked through the points that he has on his website, which I'll link below. Every section, behavioral, information, thought, emotion, every section has detailed points of what makes this specific group, whatever it is that you're looking at, has these characteristics within. We're going to start with behavioral control, and this is going to be explained to the best of my ability, but I would love it if people who had experiences that were cult-like from their little journey through the trans community themselves, whether they're an ally or they also identified as trans, whatever it is, maybe you have an experience that you would like to fill in for this section or for other videos. Oh, that reminds me. I'm going to split this up into 4 sections because there's a lot to talk about, because there's tons of points that Steven Hassan has made. So I'm splitting it up as behavioral. This is the first video. The next one's going to be information. The next one's going to be thought. The last one's going to be control. But these are just my findings. This is not only just a little bit of my experience, but mostly how other people have experienced. And this is what I've read of the behaviors. So let's jump into it, shall we? So this first one is behavioral control. The first point, regulate individuals' physical reality. And I got to admit, some of the points I was like, I don't know if I'm interpreting this correctly, but I think physical reality in this case would be the trans community wants you to believe in their definitions of what gender and sex are. And so what they'll do is they'll distribute like these kind of confusing definitions of gender to the point where members, they don't see what a person's gender is. They're conditioned to not really see it. Like, for instance, for me, like, when I was still, my head was in the ass of the trans community, like, I would look at a trans-identified male, for instance, and I would be like, I would try to look so hard at, like, oh, you're passing. I can see female in these features, blah, 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 and I would try so hard to be like, oh, yeah, that is a woman. But I knew I was kidding myself. I'm pretty sure everybody who's like, oh, I'm gender blind now, they know. They can see sex. Their brain knows exactly what it's saying. You are conditioned as a new member, that you have to ask other people's, like, you don't know what somebody's gender is until you ask. And you would have to be like, I don't know what their gender is. Like, I don't know what I'm looking at right now. Like, you do know. Of course you do know. But in a conscious way, in a, I want to cater to this person's feelings way, I don't know who they are. Let me just go ask. And that's it. That's why when you go into, as an ally as well, that's why you go into, like, certain meetings. What are they called? You know those meetings where they go in and they try to teach you how to be as PC as possible. When you go into those meetings, the first thing that they will do, well, they'll ask everybody is, oh, what's your pronouns? Let's go around, everybody. Tell us your pronouns and a little bit about yourself. And it's just, you're training everybody to not only be super sensitive to other people's feelings, but also, what's their gender? I just don't know. Your physical reality is literally bent so hard that you're like, I don't know what gender is anymore. The definition of gender, sexuality, and attraction and physical sex are made so vague and purposely confusing in order to keep members reliant on leaders to educate and support them. I would say that it's also a physical reality thing, because you no longer understand what like DNA is anymore, because our sexuality is within our DNA, our sex is within our DNA. So literally, like, even like science has been warped, which means our physical reality is also warped. So that goes into it as well. So the next point is dictate where, how, and with whom the member lives and associates or isolates. Members don't want you to be living or associating and or isolating with somebody who is trans exclusionary. I got it this time. Trans exclusionary radical feminist, or just a radical feminist. Anybody who's gender critical, anybody they deem as alt-right, anybody who seems to be subscribed to mainstream religion. You're not allowed to associate with these people. You're not allowed to live with them, because otherwise that is really sketchy and questionable to other members. You're also not necessarily not allowed to, but they will try to help you, or at least encourage you to move out of your house if your teenager is still dependent, or kid dependent on your parents. And if your parents are not supportive in any shape or form, like even the mildest, I just don't see you as this sex that you're going after. I don't see it. You're not that. But I love you just the way you are. Oh my God, it's abuse. Members of the trans community that are talking with those types of members who are with parents like this, they'll be like, oh my God, you need to get out of that house. They are going, your parents are going to practically psychologically murder you because they don't accept who you really are. And then the kid will be like, oh my God, you're totally right. I need to get out now. And sometimes um, they'll even offer, other members of the trans community will even offer, like, oh yeah, live with me. You can't hang out with these people, because otherwise you might start, like, I don't know, using your ears and like start, like, I don't know, like listening to them. It's kind of scary, isn't it? You could listen to people. It's kind of gross. The rules are a little bit more fluid here, but when it comes to what they label as cisgender people, which is normalized human beings, everyone's technically cisgendered, but whatever. Anyway, so these people can be questionable. It really strongly depends on if they're an ally, and if they're like kind of vaguely supportive, but they don't really get it. Like, they're fine, but probably you shouldn't be like talking with them too much. But it would be better if they were fully supportive of you. Still, you don't really want to trust cisgendered people. So the next point is when, how, and with whom the member has sex. And then this one's not like you have to have sex with this person. It's a little bit more fluid, but what they tend to do toward, especially people outside of the community. I kind of made a video on it with the boxer ceiling sort of thing. The cotton ceiling as well. It's like these heterosexual people will go for the opposite sex. So they identify as the opposite sex, and so they're trying to invade, lesbian and gay spaces as heterosexual people. And so they'll try to control other people's sexualities. That one applies more to outsiders rather than like leaders and trans influencers saying this is who you need to have sex with. I admit that one's a little iffy, but there is some kind of control. There's a control element in it, definitely. The next point 4, control types of clothing and hairstyles, and this one's really big actually. When it comes to non-binary people, they kind of break the rules on this one a little bit, but when it comes to transsexual people who enforce the binary, it becomes very blatantly obvious how you should dress, how you should act, how you should walk, how you should speak. They'll definitely be on it. But non-binary people do follow the rules a little bit, it's just a little bit more loose. While non-binary people do believe that you can be a boy, transgender, and wear a dress, that doesn't make her technically a girl. However, trans medicalists are very determined to keep within the binary, so dresses equal female, corduroy pants equal male, you have to dress the part as whatever you identify as. You also have to wear your hairstyle in a certain way. Like, a lot of the times they'll think, oh yeah, short hair inherently means masculinity, guyishness. But you can probably get away a little bit with like long hair as a woman technically, but she's identifying as trans, so she might have long hair, but she'll like have her beard grown out, so she'll look as masculine masculine as she can. But that's iffy, and usually long hair inspires gender dysphoria, so they don't really opt for it too much, not too often anyway. If you're a male who identifies as a woman, then you are encouraged to dress in, clothing in the female section of a clothing store, anything that looks very feminine traditionally to them, they will go to it. And if you don't wear things that make you look like you're passing, then they'll start to question the integrity of the trans medicalists, at least. They'll question the integrity of your transsexualism. They'll question it. But when it comes to non-binary people, like non-binary females will associate like a plaid button-up shirt as masculine, and so I will very frequently see them wearing this, sometimes overalls as well, and they'll just think that that's masculine for some strange reason. They'll tend to crop their hair real short, and then the males will like opt for tank tops. A lot of the time they'll go for skirts, believing that these articles of clothing are like inherently gendered. If you don't dress the part at all and you just look like a cisgendered male or cisgendered female, then you'll even sometimes get somebody who's non-binary to be like, what? I don't think that person's trans. But non-binary people slash two cutes are like, they're more open to however you're going to express yourself as, especially as long as that person who looks cisgendered is saying, oh, my pronouns are the opposite of mine, what reflects my sex. The next point is regulate diet, food, and drink, hunger, and or fasting. And the only thing I could think of here is there are really heavy links between transgender identification and anorexia. A lot of mostly females will opt for anorexia so that they can avoid female fat distribution. So staying skinny, they think, is what makes them masculine somehow, even though their skeletons are female. Whatever. Next point is manipulation and deprivation of sleep. This one's a little bit iffy. I think it's more of a voluntary act of somebody going like especially new members and like trans eggs. Which trans eggs are people who don't realize that they're trans yet, but they're kind of curious what this trans thing is. Or even more weird is a trans egg could be somebody who doesn't at all, like, trans isn't even on their brain, not on their wavelength, in their awareness at all, but they act tomboyish or femboy. And then the members of the trans community are like peeking behind bushes and going like, "That's a trans egg, I know." And in any case, so anyway, so these new members or potential new members might like spend way too much of their time on Reddit or Tumblr or DeviantArt or wherever trans people congregate. Like they'll be talking in like a group forum, group chat, group whatever, or just one person who's part of the community, and they're more likely going to be older. The younger person who's a new wanting to be a new member is like, "Oh, please tell me, how did you know that you were trans?" And then the other person will just like the conversation could go on for hours until like nightfall and past midnight. That's as far as I can think of for sleep deprivation on that one. So the next point is financial exploitation, manipulation, or dependence. And this one, I'm not like 100% sure on it, but I do know that a lot of trans-identified people will rely on the finances of others. Like maybe they can't work because of disability, or they can't work for whatever the reason is. Maybe they're too young to work, maybe they're 15. Well, whatever it is, they don't have that much money, and they would rely on the trans community to provide them money for hormones, surgeries, whatever. And then there's another case where a large portion of the trans community, it's kind of loose, but they will rely on the rich trans people who will like, enable everybody's trans rights. That's kind of part of it. So that one's not like a direct financial thing too much. The next point, point 8 is restrict leisure, entertainment, vacation time. I don't think that's a thing, but if somebody has like a tale that they've been wanting to share for a long time, you can go and illuminate that point. So the next one is major time spent with group indoctrination and rituals and or self-indoctrination, including internet. So group indoctrination can look like trans youth support groups online. The trans support groups, they can also be in person, individuals that they might know in person or online, whatever it is. It's a group setting. And it can also look like just allies, making their little meeting, their PC meeting to train other workers to be super PC. That'll also be considered group indoctrination. Once in these group settings, you're immediately met with peer pressure. It's this air of, you have to listen to us, and if you question us, we're gonna boot you the hell out of this group, sort of thing. And so with those kinds of threats, it's like, okay, well maybe I should just stay here and be quiet and listen to what they have to say. They'll be teaching other members to, the indoctrination stuff. I don't think I need to get into it specifically, but they'll definitely talk about like what they'll define gender, sex, sexuality, and they'll do little like workshops on how to define these things, and then they'll try to change everybody's preconceived notion, which was correct, but then they'll change it into something that's completely wacko and makes zero sense, but they somehow explain it in a way that people are like, oh, I guess that makes sense, because, corduroy pants are male, you're right. And then for self-indoctrination, that's definitely like voluntary. New members, especially the teenagers and the kids, will be seeking answers because they're like, damn it, I hate puberty, this is gross. And they'll be feeling a myriad of different feelings like shame and depression and anxiety and guilt a lot of the time as well. And they'll just be like, they'll learn about trans stuff and they're like, oh, okay, well, I need to know more about this stuff because it sounds kind of like what I'm going through. And so they'll go through hours and hours, several hours of their research where they're looking at YouTube videos, Tumblr posts, tweets on Twitter, and they'll just be like reading and ingesting every last scrap of information that they possibly can just so they can be like, oh yes, I think I really am trans. That's pretty much what self-indoctrination looks like. Next point, permission required for major decisions. I'm not entirely sure about that one, so I left that one blank. The next one, 11, rewards and punishments used to modify behaviors, both positive and negative. When you first get into, or at least take interest in the community, people will just love bomb you. You come in, you're like, oh, I think I'm trans, and then they'll be like, oh, really? Oh, sweetie, we'll tell you about this, that, the other. Oh, you're amazing, you're wonderful, blah, 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 blah. Yet whether or not it's true. No, it really depends on how you're behaving. Like, if you're behaving in a way that's like, ooh, I can educate this new member, can support them in their trans positive thoughts. I'm gonna give them more love bombing. I'm gonna compliment them more and more and more until they say something that might break the rules a little bit. More on the rules a little bit later. The trans community then will start getting like, ooh, you said a bad thing. Kind of sounds like you might be an enemy. So then what they'll do when they get suspicious of you is that they will threaten to isolate you, take away your friends, take away your platform, and demonize you in the community. They will tell slanderous, outrageous lies about you to convince everybody else that this person, Stacy, she's like a piece of shit. She did this, she did that, just things to make everybody else go, oh my god, you're right, Stacy's such a bitch, we should all just gang up on her, sort of thing. So it's all about like, let's get together and cyberbully yeah, even like kids who come on who are like, I don't understand. They'll be like, okay, let's gang up on this little witch with our pitchforks and our torches and whatnot. But if their threats work and you start being like, okay, I believe again, I'm not going to question anybody's whatever, I'm sorry, I confessed my sin, they'll be like, okay, back to love bombing, you're alright. The trans community makes it very difficult to leave, especially if all your friends are in the trans community. Maybe you made a lover who's in the trans community and they are also trans identified. It's also hard to leave when perhaps your parents are either hyper supportive weirdos or they're trans identified themselves, which I guess is becoming increasingly more popular now. But anyway, and then also it's hard when your therapists and doctors are also heavy-duty trans allies, and then when you come up to them questioning, like, I don't really understand this anymore. It just doesn't make sense to me. The doctors and the therapist, well, your therapist, the gender clinic, wherever you're going, will be like, no, you're probably just non-binary, psh, whatever, stuff like that. Other, like, punishments, this is a little bit more specific, but punishments, if you're breaking one of the rules, it would be trans-identified males especially will impede the trans-identified females from complaining about females' periods, and which give them dysphoria. The trans-identified male will call them privileged, that they have a womb, they have periods, they have cramps, and us trans women can only just dream of having it, so how dare you. It's that kind of behavior of, ooh, you're stepping on my toes right now, how dare you. So then they're gonna start instilling fear in that other member of like, you made me feel dysphoric, so I'm going to punish you, sort of thing. You broke one of the rules, so I'm going to make you feel bad. I'm going to make you feel anxious and codependent. That's kind of what they do. Next point, 12, is discourage individualism, encourage groupthink. The trans community requires you to think, act, speak, everything just like the rest of them, which includes regurgitating all the same arguments such as, oh, trans brains are a thing, they prove that we're trans, blah, blah, blah. A woman is how you identify as, or a man is how you identify as. Gender is a feeling, trans is being who you really are, etc., etc. And remember to check your privilege, which is definitely a huge method, not only just in the trans community, but also in just what a lot of people call woke culture. You want to check your privilege so you can cater to the feelings of other people, especially the men. You have to really cater to their feelings as a woman. You especially have to be aware of skin tones of other people. You have to cater to their feelings. You have to just be really, really careful on how you complain. This discourages the ability, as for instance, a trans-identified female to express their concerns and to only think about the feelings of others, which creates a codependency type dynamic. Another method of encouraging groupthink is by humor. Members and new members alike will get on board if something is presented as hilarious and relatable to them, which is why I've noticed that like the funnier a trans influencer is, the more likely they're going to have followers. We're like laughing along with them and be like, oh, that's really funny how you made like this trans positive joke that I can relate to. And so, once it's funny, they're like, oh, yeah, duh. Like, that's so disarming, and like, there's truth behind these jokes, and wow, I can relate to it. That's what humor is. Once you start laughing with somebody, you kind of put your guard down and you start just letting in the indoctrination. That once members latch onto trans positive jokes, this tips off members to not only further believe in the doctrine, but to follow suit, spread the jokes themselves, and be seen as also funny and acceptable to the community. Point 13, impose rigid rules and regulations. And these aren't all the rules, but it's the ones that I could think of off the top of my head. Rules include, don't misgender anybody, don't use dead names, don't trigger anybody's dysphoria in any shape or form. That includes talking about your own dysphoria. Don't question the integrity of anyone's identity. Don't criticize anyone's identity or beliefs. Don't question any member's trans journey. Don't question someone's sexuality, especially while they're reconciling with their past labels like lesbian as a female. Do ask for preferred pronouns. Do use preferred names. Do supply trigger warnings / content warnings if you are going to talk about dysphoria. Do affirm everybody's chosen identity. Do practice validating everybody's feelings, beliefs, journeys, mental illnesses, whatever the case may be, even if those mental illnesses are unchecked. Do cater to everybody's feelings and put yours last. Do encourage thoughts of trans positivity and enforce gender roles and stereotypes. That one's a little little bit more unspoken, but it's definitely there. Next, point 14 is punish disobedience by beating, torture, burning, cutting, rape, or tattooing / branding. Now, I'm pretty sure they don't tattoo / brand anybody. I don't know about burning, but definitely there are threats of beating, torture, especially psychological torture, cutting, rape. There is those in there. I've seen death threats. I mean, case in point with Blair White's channel. If he's rattled about something, especially if it's really serious threat, and it could actually like dox him, he'll post that this is what people are saying on Twitter. Like, I'm gonna murder you. I'm gonna go to your house and wait until you come out and stab you. Like, it's the evidence is very clear and it's very there. And that's just towards somebody who's like, I acknowledge that sex and, biology is our reality. They go, oop, you can't say that. You cannot say that. I'm going to murder you, blah, blah, blah. And that's part of the in-group fighting between, like, two cutes and true scum. When this happens, it compromises the entire cult, and that's why the two cutes are like, no, stop it! You can't! The cishet scums will think that we're wrong. Oh no! Rape is also threatened, especially by trans-identified males. Any type of violence really is threatened to those who don't agree with, and those who appear to be doing trans wrong. Members who desire to leave are punished by either doxing, name-calling, being called like a TERF, a Nazi, a bigot, a transphobe, etc. Accused of being fake trans, generally psychologically tortured. Yeah, it doesn't always have to be physical, but physical is definitely there. 15, threaten to harm family and friends. This one I'm not completely sure on. Next point is force individuals to rape or be raped. This one sounds iffy, but when we examine it in a radical feminist sort of view, radical feminists will believe that sex work, any kind of sex work, is rape, men raping women, since there's a lot of trans-identified males who are in the sex industry and prostitution, that would therefore be considered rape, because prostitution isn't usually a choice. It's usually you have no other choice to do anything else but prostitution, or a lot of the times it's human trafficking. Trans-identified males are more likely than trans-identified females to sexually harass and sext with other members regardless of age, but usually it'll be an older male with a younger female typically, and it could also be a younger male as well, like an older to a younger male. Next point, 17, encourage and engage in corporal punishment. It's mostly the trans-identified males who are most likely to physically punish disobedient members, as well as administer death threats, rape threats, dox, threats of battery, etc. Meanwhile, trans-identified females will employ verbal bullying and online harassment. They are more likely to play psychological games with people that are being disobedient. Next point, 18, instill dependency and obedience. This is geared more toward teenagers and young adults, especially those who believe their parents, those they depend on, are being abusive because they perceive correct pronoun usage to be abuse. Dependency and obedience also looks like the trans egg, or the new member depends on the adult influencer to provide them answers of what trans really is, according to the community. All friends will likely be from within the trans community, very little, if any, outside the community. Parents might be trans-identified or hyper-supportive, which makes it nearly impossible for a young person to differentiate reality from the doctrines, as well as separate from the cult if they have the guts to do it. Yeah, a lot of it has to do with friendship dependency. Like, I depend on the friendship of these people because otherwise I'm an anxious mess and I don't know what to do with my life. So they totally rely on the community to bring that regulation, to bring that acceptance of who they are. The next one is kidnapping. And this one sounds a little loose when I'm going to describe it, but older trans-identified folks, male or female, doesn't really matter, they will encourage a runaway teen to live with them. So, like, if the teen successfully ran away from their parents because this trans-identified older person was, like, encouraging, like, oh yeah, you can live with me because your parents are clearly super abusive to you, so come live with me. And I would say that that's a teenager, so they don't actually consent to any of it because they're a damn teenager. They don't know what they're doing. Next one is beating. Uh, and I assume beating would be like not just within the community, but also outside of the community. And I have heard stories and seen footage of mostly trans-identified men beat others who are part of the enemy group. Trans-identified males are more often than trans-identified females to batter women and children. They are also more likely than trans-identified females to batter disobedient members who threaten their identity. They are also the majority that beat and sexually harass trans-identified females. And if you talk about this is considered transphobic. Any of the following, any of the following points is celebrated and or dismissed in a positive way if the member doing the beating, torture, rape, murder, whatever, is doing it to somebody they've deemed and labeled as a TERF or transphobe. Next point 21, torture. I'd say psychological torture is very apt. It's mostly psychological torture. They do relentlessly bully, harass, dox, gaslight, and threaten members who want to or have deeply criticized the ideology and desire to leave or have already left. 22, rape. Trans-identified males are more likely than trans-identified females to rape women and disobedient members who threaten their identity. I just wanted to add that rape is also common with trans-identified persons who are full stealth. They usually, I mean, that's just the definition of what stealth is, but they don't typically tell the other person that they're trying to get in a relationship with or whoever they're hooking up with that they are trans-identified, and that would be definitely considered rape. I also have a couple cases of where a trans-identified person is a convicted felon because they have raped somebody. Point 23, separation from families. I've already said this, but trans-identified adults will inform the younger trans-identified person to believe that if their parents aren't supportive, they are encouraged to either move out as soon as they possibly can, or they will try to get that teenager a place to stay, which is kind of kidnapping, where he or she can then start hormones, which is usually what they'll do after they move them out. If a trans-identified teen/young adult has no trans adult prospects to help them, they will very likely seek help from the universities they attend and move into the dorms they provide and get onto their insurance, which enables them access to hormones and surgeries. Next point 24, imprisonment. I would say jail time is a serious threat when your coworker is trans-identified and you misgender them or you use their dead name or something. Like you could see jail time for that. And then the last one, 25, murder. There are plenty of cases where a trans-identified man has murdered women and children. I wanted to add that with murder, it's usually trans-identified males who are convicted felons who murder women and children. They get sent to female prisons because, diversity and acceptance and whatnot. So these male persons, they'll be free to rape and abuse female inmates. And nobody does anything about it because if you do anything about it, you're transphobic. So when it comes to a trans-identified person being convicted of something, a lot of the times the rest of the trans community will be like, not all of them, but whatever percentage of people will be like, oh, well, they're transgender, so it's okay. We gotta let this person free because they've had trouble at home, and so they'll just keep making excuses for these people who shouldn't be excused. And then the people who are allies defending these convicted felons, they're helping the wrong frickin' people. And I don't understand why it's so hard for these specific parts of the trans community to just be like, well, this guy's convicted criminal and he did all these heinous things. Maybe we should just ostracize him, exile him from the group so that, we can save our ass and make the community actually look, a decent community. But instead they defend them, and therefore they make the whole entire community look like people just going in, abusing the self-ID system. Anyway, so this was the first one. This one was behavioral. I hope that I illustrated all of it pretty well. I understand that this is very controversial and people will get very upset with it, but I'm just saying, like, you can't hide torture. You can't hide the truth. It's out there, and people can believe it. Like, of course, not all members are, like, into the love bombing stuff. They're not all into all the things that I've listed here and all the things that I'm going to list in the next couple videos. I'm just saying, community at large is what they do, and they're intimidating. So this was it. I hope people can comment below and like share their experiences. That would be very nice. So this is it. I've been talking for way too long, and I will see you probably next week. We'll see. Goodbye.